Por favor.
Please take your seats. We're going to begin the session.
Del órgano de negociación intergubernamental
We're going to discuss in this regional consultation the issue of our intergovernmental negotiating body. And we have with us here the people that I think are necessary. Now, we know that these last couple of days have been pretty intense. Certainly yesterday was. So I'm hoping that we can focus specifically on this issue, which I think is of importance to us all. Let me then begin this meeting by thanking His Excellency Gavarda Silva Nunes, who is the Vice Chair of the INB and the Permanent Representative of Brazil to the United Nations in Geneva. And the co-chair is connected virtually, the co-chair of the INB, that's Intergovernmental Negotiating Body, Ambassador Rizos Matsoso.
Your Excellency, Precious Matsoso. And I would like to ask you to please give your introductory remarks, and also apologizing for the late beginning of this session because we are in the middle of the Pan American Sanitary Conference. Okay, please go ahead.
Good evening, the Regional Director, Dr. Carissa Etienne, Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, INB Bureau members, Ambassador Tova, who's the Vice Chair of the INB, WHO Secretariat colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to address you, but I'm going to be brief because the person who's going to be addressing you is Ambassador
The interpreters
Tova.
regret we cannot hear the speaker, Chair. There is no sound coming from the speaker. Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Interpreters cannot hear you,
I was
madam.
saying that the person who's going to be doing the address is Ambassador Tova. I was sending my salutations to the Regional Director, Dr. Carissa Etienne, Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, WHO Secretariat colleagues. It is actually an honor to address you briefly. And thank you for affording the INB an opportunity to address you and to consult you on this important matter. And this is an ongoing work that started in February when we were appointed. But before I do that, I would like to congratulate PAHO or AMRO for reaching 120 years, an anniversary that demonstrates a historic milestone of improving health in the region. The Bureau, which is composed of representatives from 6 regions, including myself and Ambassador Tova, and I know that others like Kaz from Japan have joined us. We would like to express our heartfelt thanks and gratitude for the support you have shown and the constructive engagements that you've had from member states since we started our work. As you may recall, our work began with a commitment that we made at the World Health Assembly, a commitment through a decision for us to draft an instrument that would be negotiated by member states. And this would be also through the identification of a particular article in the WHO Constitution. So Ambassador will talk about this, but we'd like to take this opportunity to say we recognize that the aim of this is to protect the world from similar disasters from happening in future, but also to strengthen our pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. And it is our fervent hope that will work together in this mammoth task that is going to be extremely important in reversing the tide, not only of COVID, but preventing similar ones from happening in future. And it is with this recognition that the bold move that was taken by member states is going to require us to move together in this. The World Health Assembly special session theme, that the world together, is sort of a very positive response, and it's appropriate in that no single country can defeat this and confront this problem alone. So it is for this that I would like to hand over to Ambassador Tova to address you, but to also say that we've already consulted 3 other regions, namely the African region, the Southeast Asian region, as well as the European region. So you are the 4th region that will be consulting, and I would like Ambassador Tova, who will be leading the discussions, to present and address you. Ambassador Tova, over to you.
Embajador, por favor.
Mr. Ambassador, please go ahead, sir. Thank you. Let me speak from this other mic, if I may.
Good afternoon to all of you present this lunch hour. My greetings to Dr. Caresse Etienne and Dr. Ciro Ugarte, through whom I would like to thank PAHO for the organization of these regional consultation session. As you know, we have been, I want to present something on the screen, but I need somebody to help. It is an honor and a privilege to be here today because as a representative of the region, of all of the Americas in the Bureau, you have in front of you the Bureau members around Dr. Tedros. We represent 6 regions, but our role is just to steer the process. We have no negotiating mandate other than just help gather the elements that member states put together, as well as the stakeholders or any individual that would like to participate. So right now, we are represented by, from the left to the right, Japan, Katsu, and Dr. Viroy from Thailand, Precious Matsozo from South Africa, Roland Dries from the Netherlands, myself, and Ahmed Solimans from Egypt. We were mandated to draft and negotiate a WHO agreement or convention or an international instrument under the relevant article of the WHO Constitution. So draft and negotiate has not started yet, just to make sure that we're at what stage we are. You will see the timeline is rather confusing. On the top part, you have the timeline for the INB, the Intergovernmental Negotiating Body of the future instrument on prevention, preparedness, and response to pandemic. And on the bottom, you have the IHR timeline. You will see that they will both converge to the World Health Assembly into 2024, the 77th Health Assembly. That means we have not even 2 years before we are able to present from the INB a result to be adopted or not under the relevant provisions of the WHO Constitution, and also the amendments to the IHR. And the reason I'm presenting these timeline together is because we have to be able to see what's going on, not only at IHR, but also World Bank, the Financial Intermediary Fund, for example, the task force of the G20. All of the relevant discussions for the architecture of global health for us is important. Now, we have also a very important task is to engage more stakeholders apart from the member states. We keep saying that it's a member state-led process, But we are also moved by this idea of the whole of society approach. That means we are mandated to incorporate the vision not only of the member states who will lead the process, but also of the entire civil society, but also some of specific actors. One of them in Annex A is precisely PAHO. And I'm here today hoping to engage more direct participation of PAHO itself as an organization, but also its member states in the negotiations. You will see that there are many annexes, and virtually anybody, for example, that the INB decides to be important could be a relevant stakeholders. And they have been speaking. We have been holding sessions to hear their voice and their opinions on what is on the table. But what exactly is on the table? We have started our work. The decision was taken in December of last year. We started work in February this year with what we call the INB1. INB1 had 4 sessions. We met in February, we met in March, we met again twice in June, twice in March, twice in June, and finally met again as INB full session in INB2 in July. All of these sessions were necessary for us to collect, to compile what we call substantive elements. All of these now have been put together in what we call a working draft. This working draft is the beginning of a platform of this compilation so that we will in the future have the appropriate working draft that will lead us into the drafting and the negotiation of the drafting. Now, this was decided in July, and INB 2, we decided collectively, all member states, that we had then a good basis for the discussions. And then we also agreed that by mid-November, the Bureau would prepare a document that we decided to call conceptual zero draft. That means a sub-zero draft. So that at INB3 to take place in December from the 5th to the 7th of December in Geneva, we then discuss this conceptual zero draft. This is then in December, we might be able, but still has to be decided by the member states, we might be able to agree on a draft that would provide a good basis for the working drafts to be set up and then start the real negotiations. I emphasize, right now, we have not negotiated any single provision. We just compile these elements. But another important decision taken in July was the definition of which provision of the WHO Constitution we will lodge whatever we decide to produce as an instrument. And obviously, there was a lot of discussion, a lot of discussion on the pros and cons of a legally binding, non-legally binding, until we realized that any legally binding convention under WHO necessarily will have not only shalls, but shoulds, even mays and mights. So yes, it will be a legally binding instrument under Article 19, but without prejudice to the discussion of maybe application of Article 21. Article 21 is precisely the one that was under which was the IHR created. So it's a regulations article, and it's an opt-out system. That is, everybody is supposed to be in unless you say, no, I'm out. Article 19 is as legally binding, but it's you opt in. You decide there is a ratification process, and you say, yes, I want to be part of that instrument. And then there's Article 23, which is merely recommendation. So it's a different kind of approach. So now we have decided to have Article 19, but without prejudice, to also considering Article 21. So I'll go rather quickly in sort of the time of the methodology. We were supposed then to collect what was called the substantive elements through a series of process, obviously through member states. So we held these sessions. Member states had a platform that they could digitally include their ideas and views. Also, they presented written submissions and stakeholders as well. We held public hearings. And so all of these elements were then collected and synthesized in what I call the working draft. Now, I'm going through with you the parts of the working draft. This is what we have as what I call the compilation. The compilation has many parts, and it has first a vision. I'll allow you to read through, because in this vision, you have elements such as equity, human rights, solidarity, which was not really present under the current pandemic. And so we need to emphasize that. The idea of sovereign rights, but also differences in capacities or level of development. To my understanding, this is an essential element of our future instrument. We have to cater for the differences in capacities, both for the instrument, but also IHR. And so the idea also to put emphasis on universal health coverage, and so we can promote a better health and a better preparedness and response. Note that the decision talks about prevention, preparedness, and response, but during the discussions, it became obvious that we also need an element of recovery. Recovery, not economic recovery, but recovery of the capacity to prevent, prepare, and respond. So that's what we usually refer to PPRR, if the last R would be recovery. These are the principles that were presented and agreed upon for the working document, the working draft. You have, again, number 9, which is an essential principle to allow countries of different levels of development to be on board. You have gender equality, which is related to human rights, but decided by the INME members to be essential also in respect to, especially as we saw that women were most affected during the current pandemic, either as health workers, but also as mothers, wives, and employers. We also have something that's called rights of vulnerable populations. We have realized that, for example, indigenous populations require specific responses, not only responses, but also they have been able to cater for the treatment of their own people, not necessarily using the usual pharmaceuticals that are made available. So they have their own traditional knowledge, so it's important also to incorporate that. These are the objectives of the instrument put together as a list. Actually, you may ask, are these attainable? Are these implementable? We don't know yet. We are compiling ideas, we're compiling principles, objectives, but you will realize that we have made, for example, reference to prevention, preparedness, response, but also recovery, restoration of capacities for prevention, preparedness, and response. So these are the 4 objectives, actually: prepare, prevent, prepare, respond, and restore. All right, apart from principles, objectives, vision, we also have general obligations. You're going to ask me, when are you going to get to the provisions? Wait, they will come. We're still at this preambular necessary sections of any international instrument. The obligations are actually, as it would be natural, reflect some of the principles and also the objectives. And here we have then the specific areas that will require provisions. When I say provisions, that is, those are the shalls and shoulds that we have to include in the agreement. What can we do as a collective body, as members of an instrument, in order, for example, to achieve equity? This is easier said than done, because everybody thinks it's beautiful to achieve equity, but how do you do that? What means do you have to do that? Also, very important, health workforce. How do we not only make sure that they do not suffer as they did during the current pandemic, but how do we better prepare them? And how do we train them to respond? And here, last but not least, we have a very central item in our discussion, which is financing. How we will be able to finance all of these objectives and the instruments for prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery. We will then have, as in any international instrument, these rather, let's say, legal provisions. For example, the settlement of disputes. This is important in any agreement, and also, reservations. We hope that we'll be able to finalize something without too many reservations. So these are basically the sections of the instrument on the table. Now, what will happen with these sections as we go through the period from July until December? We are currently in the intersessional period. I'm here conducting this regional consultation. Precious Matsoso has already mentioned the consultations held elsewhere. We will soon have in October consultations in Eastern Mediterranean and the Western Pacific regions. We will also conduct some other hearings, public hearings, and we are also, and then that's the reason of this slide, we are also conducting, Dr. Ugarte, what we call informal focused discussions, consultations, IFCs. The first one was about legal issues, and it touched upon, for example, the legal issues, for example, touched upon this relationship to other international instruments, including the IHR. You see that the INB is constantly looking around. I forgot to mention the INB is very grateful to the work done by the working group on preparedness and response that now has turned into the working group on IHR. But we're not starting from zero. We have a basis, and we're also watchful of what goes on at, for example, WTO and other instances of WHO and World Bank and the G20. So we have already held these legal discussions, and very important elements came about. They are informal, as I said, so member states are invited to participate, but also members of the civil society. We're going to have, we're going to have one on IP issues, intellectual property, essential again, in order to strike a balance between continuing to encourage research and engagement of the private sector and investors in health, but while making the necessary adjustments in order to save lives. How do you do that? How do you put lives before the commercial interests? And I think that's going to be a very lively discussion. The discussion on equity also will be coming up in October. So based on these principles or issues, we're discussing with experts what are their views and what can we incorporate into our set of elements, things that, not being experts, we may have overlooked. So this is a slide on the way forward. We have then to complete the regional consultations, and we will then have by mid-November what is called then the conceptual zero draft. Now, don't ask me how we will do that as a bureau, because we still have to collect all of the elements. It will be an evolution, obviously, of the working draft. Member states had until mid-September, until the 15th of September, to provide further comments on the working draft. They were already able to do that during the session of the INB2. And so we're making what we can as INB in a very short period of time, I said. We have a very tight schedule, but we are, with this idea of whole society in mind, we are trying to throw the net as wide as possible, so we actually have something that is meaningful and can engage every citizen in the planet, because the pandemic will not spare anyone, as we know. Mid-November, sorry. Mid-November is the let's say the deadline for all of these various elements to be put forward. But I must emphasize the fact that whatever conceptual zero draft, the working draft, is what we call a living document. Nothing is written in stone. We even as we progress in the conceptual zero draft and then the zero draft, there's always a possibility for us to say, hey, we did not cater for this. I want to change the course of the structure of the instrument. We don't think that we were able to. There's a lot of redundancy. Let's streamline. All of this is very much possible, but we had to start from somewhere. We needed something as a template in order to push the negotiations. And then as we proceed to this third INB in December, this is when, as the Dr. Viroy from Thailand said, this is when the honeymoon is over. The honeymoon so far has been very interesting. The collection of elements was something that was not without any difficulty, not unlike maybe honeymoons, but in December, we are prepared for some interaction, very vivid, and maybe not a honeymoon, but we hope for an entente, the possibility to get together and engage. This is when we need PAHO's voice, we need the member states' voice in order to participate in the building of the conceptual zero draft, but also during INB3. It's essential that you add your voices to all of the negotiations. That's it. Thank you very much for being. I'm obviously not only now, but in the afternoon and tomorrow morning here, available for any bilaterals that you wish to hold with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Muchas gracias, embajador. Usted ha hecho un resumen.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. You have given us an acute summary of so much work and so many discussions of a very complex issue, which is a priority for all our countries. One of the most salient points that you bring to our attention is that this is led by member states, and this is how it should be. And in that process, in some other initiatives, the Secretariat has more participation, active participation. And our purpose in convening this meeting is for member states to have a greater possibility to participate, because in Geneva, not all missions, not all permanent missions have sufficient staff and the contact with the capitals, which is not always at a level which allows for a more active participation. And on the other hand, it is also important to underscore that there's several other initiatives that are being processed at the same time. And to prioritize some over others is also quite a challenge for countries. We have a physical presence here, but I also wish to announce that we have in our offices, in our country offices, PAHO's offices in the countries, we also have staff, officers from the countries that are connected. We have, for example, in the case of our office in Brazil, in Costa Rica, in Haiti, in Peru, in Uruguay, Barbados, also in Bahamas, in Suriname, and in Guyana. And these are some that I was able to jot down that are connected to this. So it is important for those who were not able to participate in person in the conference to always to hear this and to get involved and ultimately participate in a significant way in this process. So with that, I would like to give the floor to whoever wants to speak in connection with this agenda item. Mexico is recognized. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Distinguished Ambassador. A difficult summary to make with so much work that has been done when faced with the need of having this work instrument of the organization. I couldn't agree more with what Dr. Ugarte just said about the possibilities for participation by our permanent missions of our countries in Geneva. It makes it difficult, and it could even mean an imbalance sometimes in our participation by regions or by countries, specific countries. In connection with the presentation specifically, besides thanking you for the presentation, I would like to submit to you that one of the points for you, Distinguished Ambassador, to bring it to the Bureau of this group, the steering committee, where it says vulnerable populations. It seems to me that we could emphasize groups of priority attention, where a very important component is, in fact, our indigenous peoples. We have different indigenous peoples all over the world with a different traditional medicines, customs, habits, etc., but also a priority group of care and of attention that unfortunately sometimes is not so much taken into account. And this is people living with disabilities, many disabilities, visual, hearing, etc. And there is an important population in the world, and I would like to bring it to your attention so that we can have groups or attention provided to priority groups, and that this be included as one of our priorities in order to emphasize that attention to be given to these priority groups. The example that I always give in Mexico when I speak about this topic, people living with some sort of a disability, is that when we think of minorities, we're almost quasi-automatically thinking about the action in favor of all people. But when we think of an average, the people living with a disability or people from our indigenous peoples sometimes do not fit into that average. And the very clear example is attention, for example, given to a mammogram. A woman in a wheelchair that goes to a health unit to have a mammogram, and it turns out that the mammogram comes down all the way to hair. And so that 20, 30 centimeter stretch takes away that right. It takes away the autonomy from that woman. And that is what we always want to see regarding these people that should be a priority that live with a disability. Thank you very much, distinguished ambassador. Thank you, Cito. And I hope that you've already eaten your lunch, ambassador, and if not, please some lunch for the ambassador, because he's already made a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yes, ambassador. Besides coming from Geneva, he has jet lag, and as you might understand, but he's very active, as you can see. Canada, please, Mr. President, go ahead.
Thank you, Cyril. And I'm wearing my Canada hat right now, not president hat. First of all, Ambassador, thank you so much for coming here and providing this presentation. I think a principle I think is always really important among all the other principles that you had there is the principle of engagement, and in this case, regional engagement with all of us, you representing us, frankly, in the region on the Bureau. It's really important that we have these, not just at a time like this at a PAHO annual meeting, but on a regular and ongoing basis, and probably on a more frequent basis, frankly, as the negotiations intensify, I think will be very important. So just a couple of questions, comments. One on that issue of engagement, and just picking up a little bit on my colleague from Mexico, how important it is to think about all the different types of groups that need to be engaged. And I think it is important that there is a balance between what we try to do as PAHO and a region, and also as national governments, what we try to do in our own domestic engagement. And there are all kinds of categories of people that need to be engaged. But another one that I want to highlight is youth, young people who are going to be the ones who wear whatever gets decided and have to implement that in their lifetimes. And the extent to which we have a really dedicated approach as a region, and maybe even a model for the world of how we would engage all kinds of groups, but including youth, I think would be very important. Secondly, on the conceptual, I don't know if that's the first ever that's existed, this concept of a sub-zero draft, but it is novel. It is interesting. I'm still not quite certain that the deadline of mid-November will be met, but perhaps it will be. So those discussions in December can at least address what we see at the sub-zero level. It will be, I think, really important that we get a good working draft, zero draft, a zero draft as soon as possible, so that like everybody else, I'm sure in the room, every other national authority, we have to engage our political masters, and we need to get their support for this process, and to be able to give them something substantive that they can think about is going to be really significant for us. Thirdly, I don't know if you really touched on it too much, but I think an ongoing question I have is understanding the concept, of the parallel process that is happening with these negotiations on the one hand and the IHR amendments on the other hand. And of course, the IHR amendments process is moving at a faster pace. And although I know the end date for adoption of changes are still hopefully at the same time, WHA 77 in 2024, I'm not particularly, based on experience, shall we say, I'm pretty confident the IHR amendments process will be ready for decision at that time. Not so convinced that the pandemic instrument one will come to its conclusion. So we need to think about that timing issue, but justify, not more importantly, about the understanding of what is distinctive between the IHR amendment process and the issues being addressed there, and what we're trying to address through this pandemic instrument. So we avoid duplication. I know that's been a constant issue and consideration, but it's something that I think is very important for us to keep in mind. And then lastly, I think we saw in the WHA, as you recall, and others will recall, we saw the WHA in May, how easy it is for the conspiracy theorists to start talking about an issue like this as being speaking of the principle of sovereignty being given away to the WHO as a result of this process. I think it's incumbent on us negotiators to really spend an ongoing and focus on an ongoing basis on how important it is to address and deal with disinformation and misinformation around this process, and to be in fact ahead of the curve, if you want to call it that, sort of not just anticipating that it's happening, it's already starting, but in fact being aggressively out there to ensure that our publics are fully informed as much as they can be about what this is and what this is not, so that we can not be constantly behind in trying to address, as social media so effectively does, supporting and addressing the conspiracy theorists' approach out there. So thank you very much again.
So important. Thank you so much, Canada. I will give the floor to Ambassador Tovar, but just to announce that we will have Jamaica and Chile afterwards. Okay, please.
Just a mistake. Thank you. Now, Ciro, I was just afraid that having this regional consultation at lunchtime would not allow for very active participation. I was wrong, and I on purpose reduced my presentation time in the interest of time, and having heard the president saying that everybody should be here by 2:05. Thank you very much for the comments. I will address first Mexico's comment, and I think it's of the utmost importance. This is when you think that you have collected everything, but you realize that there is room for improvement. This is the idea of the living document. And I think that I take your suggestion and I'll bring that to the discussions in Geneva. And I think obviously every member state is free to bring further contributions. But I think it's good to have, sometimes difficult to channel, to the same person. It's obviously more enriching if you open up the dialogue and the consultations to others that are present. And this is exactly the purpose of my coming here and strike this dialogue directly with you. Thank you very much. I'm very much in the same wavelength as you, as those groups that need attention. And I was reminded of that, of the disabilities by Senator Mara Gabrilli, who is herself tetraplegic and our expert in the committee that deals with the Convention on People with Disabilities. And she constantly reminds us that you have to address that everywhere. She's going to Ukraine, for example, in November, because she is receiving people with disabilities from Ukraine that were not able to be to have the attention that they merited. And so we're opening that sort of humanitarian door for them to be treated in Sao Paulo and continue their work in therapy. And so thank you for reminding that. And we also know that Mexico, like Brazil, has a number of communities, and they're not all alike. They all need different attentions. One of them called Hunicuin in the border with Brazil and Peru. I received the leader in Geneva, and he said, Ambassador, we were very happy because the vaccination reached us. But we would have been happier if what we did in order to save some lives would also have been taken aboard. So we took note of that. And obviously, our Minister of Health is aware of that. And there is a presence of the Brazilian state in that region through military health and many agencies. And so we're trying also to see how much attention we do that. We're doing that, for example, when we receive immigrants from Venezuela, we realize that they need more than just shelter, jobs, and integration and documents. Some members of some communities need more than that. And sometimes it's not even integration. They want to be in their own culture. They don't want to be integrated to a different culture of their own. So you have to respect that. Obviously, very difficult to do that universally. But if you don't keep that in mind, it will be difficult to reach that goal of catering for different groups of attention. There's another one that you mentioned only marginally, which is the mental disability. Mental disability is something that's less obvious. You look at the person is able to speak and write and walk, but then not with the, let's say, the frequency or the assuredness that you would consider to be expected. And that is something that causes a stigma. Person is unable to hold a job, unable to function socially to an optimal level. So that is also in our mind. And the pandemic has actually exacerbated the situation of people with mental disabilities. Mental disabilities also being a large group of difficulties, including everything from what we know from depression and anxiety, but all the way to psychosocial disabilities from all dysfunctions. Thank you, Canada, for your inputs, and we are used to the outstanding, positive, constructive, but very painstaking comments made by Canada in Geneva that sometimes poses a problem to the Bureau because Canada is a champion of streamlining and being objective. So why put something in the instrument that is not going to be implementable? And why put something that has already been put elsewhere? Why would you duplicate? Why would you, so thank you again for your comments. I think in the line of what was mentioned by Mexico, I think putting light on youth, this is definitely something that I think has not merited enough discussion. We've been talking about gender equality, but maybe we should consider not only youth, but also the problem of ageism, how to deal with people that, the older persons and their needs in cases of preparedness, prevention, and response to pandemic outbreaks. Now, please note that the idea of sub-zero is my own creation, so I don't think the legal section of the WHO would approve of their beautiful crafting of this adjective conceptual zero. Conceptual, I think, is more optimistic than sub-zero, unless you think of sub-zero temperatures for keeping vaccines or anything that's more positive. No, yeah, yes, we have a sub-zero temperature in this room. Now, the idea of the conceptual draft, it is our belief that we will be able to produce that by mid-November. How conceptual that will be and how much of a draft that is, obviously open for discussion in December. But it is our duty, and as a Bureau, since our mission is to help and steer the process, we will produce a paper formally called the conceptual draft and zero draft, and then in December we will then offer that as a contribution for the INB to further discussion. As I mentioned, there is a part of the INB members that expect already in December for us to move into drafting committees in February. I'm not going to say whether I believe this is feasible, possible. The current deliverable timeline does not include that in December, but rather in February. But we'll see. You know, it depends on how we are moved by the discussions. But I think that's possible that we're going to have this lively, vivid discussions in December around the conceptual zero draft. Now, concerning IHR, I was unfortunately not able to spend too much time discussing IHR because first, I'm not a member of the IHR Bureau. And but we are obviously aware of what's going on at the working group. But the working group has not met yet. Supposed to meet sometime until November, I think. And so we have now the review committee meeting on the 6th of October. And sometime the working group will then have to meet to start appreciating all of these suggestions, proposals for amendments that are supposed to land on the table of the Director General by tomorrow. But we are being constantly informed of what's going on. Obviously, as member states, we have to participate in those discussions. I think there is a very good level of leadership in that discussion from those that already led the way in the WGPR. So we're very comfortable, we're very confident also that we will be able to reach something that has a meaning for the IHR and does not, let's say, does not indicate any level of redundancy. Frankly, if you were able to do that job in the IHR in a way that we would prepare, respond, and prevent and recover from pandemic, maybe we would not have the need for a legal instrument. But again, that's old news. The World Health Assembly has already decided to try our hands and have that. But again, maybe we will find that there is a way to live with a set of regulations that is perfectioned and will then rightly respond, prepare, and prevent. Again, everything is possible at the end of the day. Now, we have also, you have mentioned the idea of, was it the, oh yeah, I think we are still gathering more concepts. And in theory, we know that we have collected substantive elements that may look appropriate, may be substantive, but they haven't been tested. That's why we need the help of experts in order to see if they are implementable, if they resist science. Because not only we have a negotiating process, which is member state led, with the whole of society, based on efficiency and inclusiveness, but also based on science. So all of these elements, you have to move in that direction. And sometimes you have to privilege efficiency and be inclusive in a manner that you are efficient and legitimate. But you are not allowed not to be based on science. So these are the considerations that moves us in the negotiating process. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcelo. We have Chile and Argentina. Chile, please.
Muchas gracias, Dr. Ugarte.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ugarte. And first of all, I'd like to applaud Dr. Da Silva's role throughout this process. Thank you very much, sir. We are very, very comforted by knowing how excellently Brazil has represented us all over this phase. It's been a long and arduous path. We get that, given the time and the context in which all of this was allocated. And my point here is on 2 points. Question is, how can we at PAHO, if we're going to continue to have these regular information sessions, do more? In the very short time that we have, quite frankly, between now and December, how do you see this, sir? Are we going to have a new update? Or how can PAHO pick up where you may be leaving off? What should we do in your judgment to use this time? And furthermore, the role of Ambassador Da Silva, how can you see you using your best efforts to best effect And how can we really negotiate these in the region once the negotiations per se really get going? We need to know, as it were, what base we're on and how we can better coordinate what we're doing. To have a good practical sense of what we're supposed to do, how can we make the best use of time and learn the best possible from the pandemic? Thank you, sir. Ambassador, thank you.
Gracias, Chile. Yo quisiera,
Thank you, Chile. I'd like to stress the importance of the role of PAHO. I think it's essential that there be a role of PAHO here. By the way, I do not have a mandate from the Bureau. This is my own sense. I would very much like there to be, let me put it that way, like there to be a role and a presence of PAHO representing the organization in this negotiating process. It goes without saying, but I'm going to say it flat out. I am absolutely at your service to have these virtual meetings up to November, and quite frankly, following November, because I think the advantage to these encounters is that we can put our heads together and have an idea of what is expected of us and what spaces of time, and we can compile what we've done, take stock of where we are and what we need to do in a coordinated fashion. So please know that I stand ready to engage with the organization anytime you see fit. We could do it virtually. Why not? Why not? Let's do it. And we can do that, ad infinitum, really. It isn't a set context. This particular meeting that we're holding today, which is, if you wish, more formal from a protocolary standpoint, was really to kind of dot our I's and cross our T's. But I agree with Chile, this isn't enough. And frankly, time is fleeting. So I think we need to multiply every chance we can get to increase our dialogue. Let's aim for 2 or 3 sessions before December. Why not? And maybe try to get a common position so that the voice of the Americas can best be heard through this organization. I think that would be totally natural and frankly legitimate. Coordinated voice. Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. I think that is the perfect role for the Bureau. But the Secretariat of PAHO, please know, is certainly at your disposal to make available all necessary information, and depending on the priorities of the countries as they may set them forth, to try to craft a regional conceptual position. So any way we can help in the negotiating process, we're here to do so. Let me give the floor to Argentina. Thank you, Ciro. Before anything else, thank you, Ambassador, for this report. For us, it has always been critical to use these opportunities as we are meeting today, because quite frankly, these processes going on in Geneva seem awfully far away. And yet I recognize that they are of an importance from a dynamic, from a strategic standpoint for the region that makes it necessary for us to really be more engaged. I understand that, but I'm struck by 2 things. That perhaps if we had worked more to strengthen this FCI, it might not have been necessary to deal with the kind of instrument we're dealing with now. These IHR, the interpreter clarifies, the international health regulations. And if we could look at the IHR from a conceptual and a strategic standpoint and do so in perhaps a sharper focus, I think that would be good. And with regard to the instrument itself, we have been working very hard within the context of Mercosur, trying to follow this to better understand what our own regional priorities are. And I think that above and beyond the Mercosur countries, but for the countries in the region at large, it makes sense to have a greater idea of what our common challenges are. I think it'd make good sense to try to focus on, you name it, 3, 4, maybe 5 lessons learned, major strategies that have emerged from the pandemic experience, and what would those regional priorities be? I think that the role of PAHO in that regard is very clear, particularly to really galvanize our participation in Geneva. We're very clear that a number of the issues that are of importance to us that have to do with equity for our region, the question of access, couldn't be more important. All of the inputs that we require, the question of counting on the available data and access to benefits that are devolving, all of that really needs to be understood and seized. And so how we can use this tool, this platform, if you wish, to understand that it will put us in a better strategic position, I think is to the good. Thank you. Thank you, Argentina.
You know, this idea, were we able to do something with IHR in due course, we would not need an instrument. Now, it's not only too late, but I think we have to see how far we get into the instrument, because the instrument is clearly a lot more, it's a lot wider in its scope, and the provisions are of a different nature. Up to now, the collected substantive elements indicate a role that is broader than the IHR. Notwithstanding that, I think it's necessary also to keep very good track of what we still can do on IHR. You recall that took us, what, a decade to review that until 2005. And that's when an organization has 120 years of history in and cooperation in health matters, and especially in epidemiologic issues, has a voice and has a contribution to. And agree completely with you that we have to maximize this voice in the best way that we can. The whole region, parts of the region. I am aware of the very constructive role of Mercosur and the IHR, and believe me, Argentina has one of the best teams in Geneva. Not only the ambassador is outstanding, but Jimena, you know, a colleague that is constantly bringing about the issues that are very much of importance. So we're also happy to interact with many of you are very well represented. Do know that in Geneva, currently we are coordinated by Haiti. Is doing a fabulous job in, at least in Geneva, trying to get the region together. We were helped by the US, for example, holding also meetings, Canada, and we were formally helped by Guyana, which was also exceptional in its effort to coordinate. So we're trying already in Geneva also to keep the missions in dialogue, but I think it's necessary to throw this net to this side of the hemisphere that I represent at the Bureau, so that we can have these fresh elements from you. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, embajador.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I have a comment to make with regard to those procedures. All of the considerings, as we have considered this IMB issue, points to the analysis. The whole question of the amendment process of the IHR is ongoing. In fact, the very next meeting of the review committee of the IHR is going to be next week. So there are a number of things that are happening in parallel, to pick up what Canada said, but also to home in on what the ambassador just said. Our participation as a region in the crafting of a new instrument needs to be seen for what it is. It's of vital importance to us. We listen to the ambassador, and we imagine that we are listening to a health professional. And we talk about youth, we talk about disability. The connection, the synergy, and the synchrony is so good, is it not? That I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say we are all very proud to have the distinguished ambassador represent us. At the very same time, we need to recognize the fact that if we as individual countries are not present in the negotiation of an instrument that is going to be and is of such importance when it comes to be discussed at the assembly, we'll have missed the train. We can't start thinking about it by the time it's almost at the assembly. We've got to get going before that. And this has to be a document that is a living document for us, not just a dead letter before it gets going. The implementation of the regulation, the implementation of this and other regulations are of vital importance. All we need, very often we say, is just we need a resolution to say with the agreement of all of those present. Wouldn't that be great? But never mind. We are where we are, and we have to be clear about where we're going. And we know that there's a long road to travel. We need to be focused on seeking the solutions of those problems that we have not yet, to our satisfaction, appropriately described. And let's just hope we find a solution that suits us. Ambassador Silva Nunes, I tell you, I'm so grateful that you're here, and let me offer you the floor, sir, to make a few final comments if you wish to, but please go ahead, Ambassador. Oh, excuse me, I think I have Brazil. Brazil is seeking the floor. Go ahead. Thank you so much, Ciro. I just very quickly wanted to say, and I'm going to say it in Portuguese since we do have the benefit of professional interpretation. We know how involved the participation of Brazil has been in this intergovernmental negotiating body. It has been a challenge, certainly as this got going, but we are very much in touch with important negotiations and organizations like the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation and so many others in Brazil. I want, that said, to specifically raise the following. The experience of the pandemic in Brazil made it very, very clear what enormous inequality there existed in terms of access to vaccines and a number of other elements that have to do with our general health structure. And so in terms of distribution, the challenges that we need to recognize and the lessons we need to have learned in terms of the ACT Accelerate, the COVAX facility, and others as we move forward, lead me to say that the region of the Americas is absolutely determined to strengthen all of this. I'd like to know, as your coordinating role for the INB, how do you anticipate these things at the local level, transfer of technology, intellectual property issues, and also what might be the steps ahead in terms of the priorities that the organization should have to become more visible, and how can we strengthen it as we move forward? Thanks very much. Thank you, Brazil, says the ambassador.
This is not an easy question, how to reach equity and how to strengthen local capacities. I'm saying that it's not easy because we have already different levels of capacity to respond and to prepare. And I think there is room, and when I mentioned 120 years of cooperation, I meant precisely that. We have devised ways, funds, for the region to cater for outbreaks and problems of health. So we have within the region already, let's say the obligation, I would say, to see what else we can do. What else we can do in order for us within the Americas to go further in this strengthening. Not only because we have many countries that are very deep into research, and you have some smaller countries like Cuba that has done an outstanding job in catering for also for responses. We also, as you mentioned, Brazil and Manguinhos, Oswaldo Cruz, Butantan. We have in Argentina, in Chile, we have in many countries of the region this capacity. And obviously, I didn't mention Canada and the United States because it's obvious that. So we have a region that is diverse in terms of being able to respond and to prepare for pandemic outbreaks. Notwithstanding, we've seen that there's a room for improvement. So I think one of the common denominators of the region is see what do we mean by intellectual property, how best to move forward in that. Unless we do that, we will be in Geneva discussing among ourselves whereas we could very easily bring that discussion first here to the Americas, and then with the help of PAHO, we could devise, these instruments. So the step number one is to see what we can do here. And then we have to revert to the experiences that were successful in our region and maybe reproduce in, let's say, more regional centers so to have more possibility of actors in countries that are now not taking part. And that's easy, maybe divisible if you, for example, instead of working only on IP, you work on transparency first. Transparency is essential. We've seen a festival of non-transparent attitudes during the current pandemic. And I think there's room, I'm not blaming anyone, I'm not blaming any individual or actor, but I think there is room for more transparency. The more transparent you are, and also you have to create a transparency and a trust mechanism where you share, you also receive information, you share what you have and you receive what you don't have. And I think that if you devise an instrument that it can be outside the region, very easily done in order to be able for countries that have already some research to share with those that do not have, so that they are empowered and we do this sort of a mutually beneficial transfer of technology, instead of being sort of a charity where you give me because I don't have, and then you pay me because I don't have enough money. I don't think that has worked in many other instances. It's possible, I think, to devise something more creative and more engaging in for those that have, based on the spirit of solidarity and based on the idea of helping others build this better health system, we could share this mechanism. So I think a country like Brazil has this capacity, would be able to share that. So let's see how far we can do that within the region, and how can we reach, for example, we have in the past used Brazil, South Africa, and India as a triangle of three democracies that work together in terms of developing solutions in many areas. So IBSA is maybe one way of reaching out, and I'm not talking about Brazil, but I'm talking about the Americas, together with Africa and together with other regions that are willing to participate, multiply this instance of both transparency and transfer of knowledge and of technology. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. It was a very good discussion, and we have all the countries also connected, that they were attentive to all the comments. So in that regards, I would like to ask you to give us your concluding remarks, the way forward, how we can proceed on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Once again, thank you very much for all of you present here today, those online. My special salute to Precious Matsoso, our dear co-chair, and also to Roland Dries, my colleagues from the Bureau. Hello, Katz. There is this very good positive environment within the Bureau, and we do not only represent the regions anymore. We represent, this idea of moving forward, using the best that we can, our knowledge and capacity of articulation. So I'm very grateful for this moment of consultation with the region, because this will enable me to, in Geneva, to think of other ways and better ways to represent the region, incorporating your ideas and suggestions on a continuous basis. This should not be a one-off. We should be meet more regularly. And this is my intention to offer myself as an interlocutor. I have an outstanding health team supporting me in Geneva, but also in Brazil. And so my wish is to continue in that line of working together so that we can produce an instrument of relevance. Dr. Gartio mentioned the importance of this instrument. I think some of us may prefer not to think of how important it is, otherwise we will not have an easy sleep at night. But we are certain that we have a mission, and we will do our best to fulfill this mission until May 2024, when we finally meet to discuss the final approval of the instrument. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Bye-bye.
We have some minutes to resume the conference. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ambassador.
Bye-bye.
Ah.
No, I was saying goodbye and thank you so much for inviting us, and we look forward to working with all of you under the leadership of the region, under the Ambassador Tova. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So, Ambassador, thank you so much.